Good morning and good afternoon, art historians. Great to see you again as we work our way through Unit 10, as well as review some material from previous units for the exam. While the material in Unit 10 is not covered on the AP test this year, it's still important to teach you this information so you have exposure to global contemporary art. In the case of the work from Unit 10 today, I think you're going to see how contemporary art actually connects to the other content and brings our course full circle. My name is Allison Napier, and I am here. It's my day, right? John was yesterday, so welcome aboard. Today, we will be covering topic 10.3, interactions within and across cultures and global contemporary art. Working on skill 4, explaining how a specific work of art or group of related works demonstrates continuity and or change within an artistic tradition, style, or practice. And we're going to focus today actually on Western practices, specifically going on in the city of Rome. We're going to cover learning objective INT 1A, explaining how interactions with other cultures affect art and art making. So the other cultures we're dealing with in this case are actually Roman cultures from different time periods. We're going to cover Zaha Hadid's MAXXI Museum and connect it to other architectural works in the image set from Rome, Italy, and focus on the tradition and change in these building traditions. Works of art and architecture build on previous conventions and styles. Sometimes traditions are accepted in their entirety. In other cases, they're adapted, and in some instances, they get rejected and new choices are made that then become a new sort of tradition. So we'll kind of work our way through that. But as always, we're going to begin where we left off yesterday. So let's take a look at the question John left us with. Explain two aspects of Smithson's intent in creating Spiral Jetty, and then compare how Smithson and Bill Viola, I guess, address the element of time. And so when we think about Smithson's intent, we're talking about his choice to make relevant art in concert with a newly born environmental movement in the 1970s. He's calling attention to the processes of the earth, including entropy, and showing the relative insignificance of human activity on the earth. He's rebelling against the art market, the gallery system, the museum system, and bringing art out into the natural world for people to experience it firsthand. He uses a common symbol of the spiral to relate to cycles and regeneration. This was also a very common symbol in the region for Indigenous American populations. You can see it on rock carvings out there. And overall, he's creating beauty and a sense of the sublime, because as a viewer, when you interact with this work, you are completely dwarfed by its size. As you move through the jetty and navigate that spiral, you realize just how small you are in the universe. As far as the element of time, Viola, when we look at his performance piece, he slows down time through manipulation of film techniques. Unlike a painting, it's a work through time with a beginning and an end. Smithson makes his viewers aware of geological time as well as the passing of time through the forces of entropy. He makes viewers slow down and walk to experience the art, and it takes some effort to get out there. We have our AP readings in Spiral or in Salt Lake City, and so it's a solid hour and a half to 2 hours. You got to get the rental car, you drive out, you pass the Golden Spike, you go down this dusty road. There's nothing there but some cows, the occasional tumbleweed literally rolling through, and then you get to this rocky shore of the Great Salt Lake, and you have to descend down to be able to access the jetty. So it does require a great deal of effort and time. So this idea of the process of getting out there, getting down to it, walking through it, and then coming back and reflecting on your experience as you make your way home, all really important to the work. So things we're going to think about today are how works of architecture are in conversation with one another across time and space. Buildings coexist within cities. They reflect the styles, materials, aesthetics, and practices used during different historical contexts. And really nowhere is this more prevalent than Rome, Italy. Unlike some major European cities, I'm thinking of Paris, Rome has not destroyed all of its ancient, medieval, and Renaissance architecture in an attempt to modernize the city center. So the modern structures have really been integrated into the larger city and right they're kind of right on the outskirts maybe of the center, creating an architectural pastiche in which the buildings from different contexts and styles speak to each other in very unique ways. So we're going to see how these buildings in this kind of conversation across time and space show us continuity within building traditions, as well as demonstrate changes. So our work that we're focusing on today is Zaha Hadid's MAXXI National Museum of 21st Century Arts. This project was devoted to creating a national center for contemporary art and architecture, and it involved an international competition that was launched by the Ministry of Cultural Heritage in 1998. Zaha Hadid, a female architect and Anglo-Iraqi architect, was chosen from among 273 candidates who applied. And her proposal convinced the jury because of its capacity to integrate with the urban fabric of the neighborhood in which it was being built. It also uses innovative architecture that successfully interpreted the potential of new institutions and equipped it with an extraordinary sequence of public spaces. Dame Zaha Hadid, again, is an Iraqi-British architect. She is the first woman to receive the Pritzker Architecture Prize in 2004. She was made a dame by Elizabeth II for her services to architecture. And so that's like being knighted, but you become a real dame, I guess, in the sense of a female. In February 2016, she received this honor in the month preceding her death. She died very suddenly of a heart attack when she was being treated for bronchitis in 2016. She also won the Royal Gold Medal from the Royal Institute of British Architects. She was described by The Guardian of London, the newspaper, as the Queen of the Curve, who liberated architectural geometry, giving it a whole new expressive identity. Her major works include the London Aquatics Center, which she designed for the 2012 Olympics, Michigan State University's Broad Art Museum, the MAXXI Museum, which we're looking at today, as well as the Al Wakra Stadium in Qatar, which is being designed and completed for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. When she passed away in 2016, she left 36 unfinished projects. Her business partner, Patrick Shoemaker, then took over lead of the firm Zaha Hadid Architects, or ZHA, and assured all of the clients that these commissions would be completed, as well as beginning to start new commissions to keep the firm going. So when we look at her, she's truly a remarkable architect for so many reasons. When we look at her work, you can tell that she's done this radical deconstructivist design. That's kind of what she's known for. And designing buildings like this is really only possible once we have something called CAD software developed by the French. It was developed to help design airplanes, and then architects began to, like Frank Gehry and Hadid, take this and begin to use it to craft sculptural buildings. I always kind of think of these two as architectural sculptors, or sculptors first and architects second. It's as if they make the shape and then figure out how to build it. Her first major built project is the Vitra Fire Station, which you see in the upper left in Weil am Rhein, Germany. She composed a series of very sharply angled planes, and the structure resembles a bird in flight. She has an interest in creating these interconnected spaces with a very dynamic sculptural form, and this is pretty much something we see throughout her style. She solidifies her reputation when she does the Lois and Richard Rosenthal Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is an 85,000 square foot center that opened in 2003. It was the first American museum designed by a woman, so she does a lot of firsts as a female architect. Essentially, it's a vertical series of cubes and voids, and the museum is located in the middle of Cincinnati's downtown area. The side that faces the street has translucent glass facades and invites the passerby to look into the workings of the museum, kind of getting rid of that idea that the museum is an uninviting or remote space. The building's plan curves gently upward after visitors enter, and she hoped that this would create kind of an urban carpet that welcomes people into the museum. The image or the structure we have in our image set is the MAXXI. And this museum participates actively to the location in Rome, which is on its first outskirt of the old center, but still central to the city center. The Flaminio neighborhood has been part of this interest in rejuvenation and a renovation program that includes an auditorium designed by architect Renzo Piano as well. The long MAXXI construction process completed the idea of a renewed city. Moreover, the MAXXI is the first national museum of contemporary art in Italy, so it brings a lot of attention by the public and the media, and also brings additional economic activities to the region. It's become a central point in Rome, especially for a city kind of labeled as a old or antique city looking to claim a modern or contemporary identity. The curved smooth walls dialogue with the classically designed and inspired symmetrical facades of ancient Rome. The structure and its components declare the feasibility and the need of the coexistence between the old and the new. The museum is well inserted in the urban block, taking its guidelines and opening its cut-end wings as panoramic viewpoints. The site itself was that of an old military compound, the formerly known Caserma Montejo in the Flaminio neighborhood, just north of the historical center. And despite the support of the Italian government, it took almost 11 years to see this building completed. A lot of it had to do with political instability, as well as the revisions of the original program and the spaces of the museum. Today, the MAXXI is probably the most lively cultural center of Rome, the most influential in Europe, and offers a wide range of exhibitions, activities, and special events. It won the Sterling Prize in 2010 for architectural quality. The MAXXI design goes beyond the concept of building a museum. The complexity of the volumes, the curving walls, the variations and intersections, the different levels determining a very rich spatial and functional configuration that visitors may pass through ever different and unexpected routes. As declared by the architect, the museum is not an object container, but rather a campus for art where flows and pathways overlap and connect in order to create a dynamic and interactive space. And when I read that quote, I automatically thought of Trajan's Forum and all the things that were going on there as an interactive space, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The continuity of spaces makes it a suitable place of any kind for moving and temporary exhibitions without redundant wall divisions or interruptions. Hadid created this work with the intention of designing a new fluid kind of spatiality of multiple perspective points, fragmented geometry, and a design to embody that chaotic fluidity of modern life. And so it's an interesting building to put in conversation with the rest of Rome, which is often considered static as a city because of its classical heritage. A total floor area of 310,000 square feet. Hadid integrates some of the old military structures with a new L-shaped building. A full-height lobby constitutes the core of the museum, from which access to exhibition galleries, auditorium, cafeteria, coffee, and service spaces are provided. There's a large stairwell, series of bridges that interconnect the different parts. The old military structures accommodate a restaurant, a library, architectural archives, and administrative offices. There's also external areas with a welcoming array of outdoor spaces with chairs, tables, benches, and green spaces as well. Particular attention was given to the natural lighting of the thin concrete beams on the ceiling, together with glass coverings and filtering systems. The same beams have a bottom rail from which art pieces can be suspended, and the beams, the staircases, and the linear lighting system guide the visitors through an interior walkway, which ends in a large space on the third level. From here, a large window offers a view back to the city through an unobstructed core. Again, this idea of creating a fluid building, dropping traditional articulations of separate, secluded rooms, typical in a lot of old and modern museums, was all intentional by Hadid. She said the MAXXI supersedes the notion of a museum as an object or fixed entity, presenting instead a field of buildings, accessible to all with no firm boundary between what is within and what is without. Central to this new reality, its primary force is a confluence of lines, walls that constantly intersect and separate to create indoor and outdoor spaces. The structure is composed of these curved sidewalls made in self-consolidating concrete, which is left bare, unadorned. So this was done to achieve the desired surface appearance and have more control over it. A special concrete production facility was actually installed on the site, so they had easy access to the building material. Horizontal structures are mostly made of black painted steel beams, sometimes clad with glass fiber and reinforced concrete panels. In the case of the roof trusses. So this is one of the first projects in which Hadid experimented with fluid and curved geometries made in concrete, an evolution from earlier works like the Vitra fire station that we looked at. So having taken a look at Hadid's work, what I want you to do now is think about this building, Mies van der Rohe's the Seagram building, which was created in the modern architectural style known as the international style. So I'd like for you to take a minute, look at these two works, and think about how the MAXXI differs from this modernist structure. So I'll give you about a minute. Okay, so we got about 20, 30 seconds to start wrapping up maybe some of your thoughts. We'll get back together in about 20 seconds. Okay, so Mies van der Rohe comes to the United States from Germany. He was a faculty member at the Bauhaus, and he is versed in the internationalist architectural style. And he's given an unlimited budget by the Seagram's heiress Phyllis Lambert to create a large building for the Seagram Corporation. And so when we talk about the international style, these characteristic traits of the style are to articulate the structure of the building externally. So in other words, you can read what's happening on the inside of the building from the outside. So it's a functional utility of structural elements that should be made visible, get rid of the decoration, and honestly converse with the public. The building should talk to the public about what it actually does without distracting the public with a lot of decorative elements. All the large buildings at this time being built with steel frame, and then this non-structural glass curtain wall is hung on the frame. We've got a skeleton and skin kind of technique being used here. American building codes at the time required that structural steel be covered by a fireproof material, and that was usually concrete. But because Mies didn't want to do that, he wanted to avoid it at all costs, he used non-structural bronze-toned I-beams to suggest the structure instead. So our method of construction here, using an interior reinforced concrete shell to support the larger non-structural edifice, has been adapted as a technique for these type of buildings ever since. And you can see, compared to the Hadid work, we have the large rectangular box versus this form that kind of projects out and moves back and forth and is a little bit irregular in its shape. So now we're going to do a quick dash through some of the other works that we see in Rome from our image set: the Colosseum, the Pantheon, Trajan's Forum, Santa Sabina, Il Gesù, and San Carlo alla Quattro Fontane. So we have quite a list to take a quick trip around. The Colosseum could hold an estimated 50 to 80,000 spectators at various points in its history. Average audience was about 65,000, used for gladiatorial contests, public spectacles, MAXXI battles, and the floor of the Colosseum, known as the hypogeum, was filled with mechanisms to support activities that occurred in these performances. It was constructed with several different materials: wood, limestone, tufa, rock, tile, cement, and mortar. And of course, the Romans, given credit for creating concrete, understood the importance of mixing that recipe mixing in different stones of different weights. So a lot of their structures are actually built with a heavier stone at the bottom, like a limestone, and a pumice mixed into the mixture at the top to kind of counter those forces of gravity. You can see the top level, which was finished by the son of Vespasian in 80. Vespasian takes over the project when we have the kind of changing of the guard to give the site back to the Romans as a form of entertainment. Inaugural games were held in 80 and 81. The building then gets remodeled by Vespasian's other son, Domitian, who constructs the hypogeum at the bottom, and also it adds to the seating capacity. Over time, the Colosseum gets stripped of materials, and by the early 19th century, the hypogeum's floor was buried under 40 feet of dirt. And it wasn't until Benito Mussolini comes in and has this glorification of classical Rome project in the 1930s that we see the Colosseum emerge from the dirt and become restored. When we put the Colosseum in, when we look at it in comparison to the MAXXI, we have this, what really spoke out to me was the silhouettes of the building, which of course this would have been round, right, all the way in its entirety. There would have been a shade that went over the top. But what I thought was really interesting was this kind of broken angular front here that compares to that rectilinear projection of the MAXXI's front. Of course, they both use concrete. They're both sharing in using exterior columns. The curving nature of both structures, certainly similarities, but different. With the MAXXI, there are no rounded arches, and there's that sense of rectilinearity which goes against the rounding of the arches and the round form of the Colosseum itself. When we compare the interior spaces, there's an interesting series of interconnected architectural elements going on in both of these structures. And this is all for the entertainment and the directing of the masses and the kind of the traffic that goes there as you get to your seat, as well as the moving of elements up and down from the floor or sending people down through the museum for different exhibits. So very sophisticated structures, both of them using cutting edge technologies of the time. The Forum of Trajan, our next work, was the final and largest of all Rome's complex imperial fora. So this was a huge construction project. It's very elegant, lots of top-level architectural decoration. It had two libraries. It was a lot of imported marble, statues, gilding, a decorative program that had statues of Dacian prisoners and notable Roman statesmen and generals as well. The forum was composed of a main square measuring about 200 by 120 meters that was flanked by porticos, these extended roofed colonnades, as well as by exedrae, which are the semicircular recessed spaces on the east and western sides. A contested element right now is this idea of the temple to Trajan, who became a god after he died, and where it was placed. Some say it was behind the Trajan's column. Some say it was in other areas on the site. So that's a little bit in contest, but there was the temple on the site. The main structure at the center is the massive Basilica Ulpia, named after Trajan's family name. Basilica is a very important structural element that we'll see where that goes with the Christian churches as we begin to develop cathedrals and basilicas. Once Christianity becomes legal, they adopt this form. So two libraries flanking either side of the column as well, one in Greek, one for Greek scrolls, one for Roman items. And the architectural type of the basilica serves a lot of different purposes, different civic purposes, juridical purposes. The planners use this as a framing device, and it flanks the forum square. So the basilica, again, massive, in the interior nave about 25 meters wide. What we see when we compare it with the MAXXI is that they have some substantial differences. First of all, Trajan's form is stone, not concrete. It has exterior statuary and decoration. It has a forum as a core of the overall site that includes the marketplace. You have the basilica and open area in the front as the core of the forum. The MAXXI made of concrete, its lobby is the core, but both have outdoor spaces. They have certain military connections with the decorative program of the Dacians in Trajan's Forum and the actual use of old military structures in the MAXXI. Both have a library, both have administrative offices, both have several spaces for people to interact with and through and move around. The Pantheon, a former Roman temple, now a Catholic church, is our next site. I almost said next item up for bid, like The Price is Right. I guess I've been home too long watching television. Anyway, the site of an earlier temple commissioned by Marcus Agrippa. It gets completed by the Emperor Hadrian. It has the large portico front, the Corinthian columns, under a pediment, the rectangular vestibule that enters into the rotunda, the ceiling, coffered concrete dome with a central oculus. And again, the height of the oculus and the diameter of the interior circle are the same, 142 feet in height and width. This is probably the best preserved of all the ancient Roman buildings, in large part because it's been in continuous use throughout its history. Since the 7th century, it's been a church dedicated to St. Mary and the martyrs. The Pantheon's large circular domed cella with a conventional temple front portico is typical stylistically of Roman architecture and Roman temples, although the round structure is a little bit of a new form for them. They also had the square temples that we can think about when we talk about the Etruscan temple in the image set. Nevertheless, it becomes a standard exemplar when classical styles get revived, and we see a lot of copies by architects. I thought what was interesting with this structure was to compare the intricate nature of the ceiling designs, the focus on lighting, although these are accomplished in very different ways. The use of geometrical structural forms that double as decorative motifs, all of these creating a visual content for the people interacting with the space that draws your attention upward, either through the coffering towards the oculus or these very intricate designs of line intersecting in the MAXXI. Santa Sabina, the next structure we look at, is the oldest extant Roman basilica, and it preserves that original colonnaded rectangular plan and architectural style. So that basilica we saw in Trajan's Forum actually gets adapted for the early Christian churches. It's built by Peter of Illyria, who's a Dalmatian priest, between 422 and 432, near a temple of Juno on Aventine Hill in Rome. The exterior of the church has large windows made of selenite, not glass, and looks pretty much the same as it does in the 5th century. So the central nave, the 2 flanking aisles we see, the use of clerestory lighting also fits in with this discussion of lighting that we just had with the Pantheon about the MAXXI. Now we're going to fast forward from late antiquity and the early medieval period to the late Renaissance and early Baroque Rome for the Church of Il Gesù. The mother church of the Jesuits, a Catholic religious order. The facade is considered one of the first truly Baroque facades, although this church was constructed at different phases, so it does kind of dabble, depending on the textbook you're using. It might be placed at the end of the Renaissance or at the beginning of the Baroque, or even both. The facade of the church was modified and done later than the original structure, which was done in the 16th century by Giacomo della Porta. We can see the 2 main sections decorated with acanthus leaves and pilasters and columns with capitals. So the lower section divided by different pairs of pilasters mixed with the columns and framing the main door. When we put it in conversation with the MAXXI, although one is brick and stone and the other is concrete, when we talk about the MAXXI, both have that sense of movement through the use of sculptural modeling of their facades. Both have what seems to be limited use of windows on those facades, and both share the use of columnar elements at the entranceways. The last church we look at and another church in the Baroque style is San Carlo alla Quattro Fontane by Francesco Borromini. This was the first independent commission he had. It's an iconic masterpiece of Baroque architecture, built as part of a complex of monastic buildings on Quirinal Hill in Rome for the Spanish Trinitarians, which was an order dedicated to the freeing of Christian slaves. He received the commission in 1634 under the patronage of Cardinal Francesco Barberini, whose palace was right across the road. The tall Corinthian columns stand on plinths. They bear the main entablatures. These define the main framework of the two stories and the tripartite bay division. Between the columns, smaller columns, with their entablatures weaving through the main columns, and in turn they frame niches, windows, and a variety of sculptures, as well as the main door. And then there's a central oval edicule on the upper order and an oval frame medallion borne aloft by angels. The layout of the cramped site is difficult. The church on the corner and the cloister next to it, both of them face the Via Pia, so this actually has two facades. Before the Baroque style became the choice of the 17th century, the Renaissance was full of buildings with very rectangular shapes. And so this Baroque style coming in introduces ovals and curves, and Borromini combines these cubic elements to create a floor plan that fit the awkward site that was based on ovals. The interior is both complex and extraordinary. The three principal parts can be identified as a lower order on the ground level, the transition zone of the pendentives, and the oval coffered dome with its oval lantern. In the lower part of the church, there's a main altar on the same longitudinal axis as the door, and two altars on the cross axis. And this creates an undulating movement effect that's enhanced by the variation of treatment in the bays and the columns with the niches and the moldings in the doors. Light floods in from the windows from the lower dome, and these windows are hidden by the oval opening, and from the windows in the side lantern as well. When we look at it in conversation with the MAXXI, we see the use of white, certainly as a formal element to focus on, as well as the actual attention given to the light and how to light the interior building. The challenges of a difficult site, with Borromini trying to work in this weird space that he had available to him, and with the MAXXI trying to incorporate that old military installation. So the sense of movement that's created by both of these architects through their application of geometric elements, line, design, all of those things kind of coming together to demonstrate traditions and changes within Roman architectural forms. So things we need to think about. While at first glance, the MAXXI seems to have very little in common with earlier Roman architecture, it actually does borrow and adapt elements of these styles into the structure. Each building in Rome has a unique history, and they all create a fabric that works together in the city and gives it its own distinctive character. The MAXXI, in conjunction with the older structures, creates a continuum of art and architectural production from antiquity to the 21st century, which makes Rome somewhat a unique site in its own. While the styles we have examined differ in their focuses on symmetry, balance, and geometry, as well as their building materials, the structures coexist and all function as important elements in the overall personality of Rome as a city. The diversity of buildings in a city like Rome demonstrate continuity and change in Western tradition. Through the borrowing and adapting of architectural elements, the buildings speak to each other, and they talk about the history of the city, its people, technology, style, and the greater Western canon of architecture. And all of this continues today, especially with Zaha Hadid building this contemporary work. You look forward to seeing what the next chapter of Rome will be, and what the next conversation, what conversation will be had next. So before we leave, let me give you a little bit of a homework assignment, the AP practice question. And this one's set up a little bit for maybe a longer response, like a 30-minute essay. So the images presented here are two interior views of an architectural structure located in Rome from the image set. Fully identify the work in these images, which should be familiar from today. Select and fully identify another building in Rome from the image set. Describe the function of each building. Comparing this work with your selected work, explain how specific building traditions are demonstrated in the structure shown on the left. So pick your work, the earlier work, and then talk about how the images here and other aspects of the building that may not be shown are in conversation with that earlier structure. Next, comparing this work with your selected work, explain how specific changes are demonstrated in the structure shown on the left. And I'd like for you to choose from either the Colosseum, Santa Sabina, or San Carlo alla Quattro Fontane. And give it a whirl, see what happens. So I'm going to sign off for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed our little trip through time and space as and to Italy, right? To Rome to check out all this awesome architecture. Again, my name is Allison Napier, and it's been a pleasure to bring you these amazing works of architecture today. And just a reminder, if you're having any problems with technology, please contact us at cb.org/tech so we can help you get everything worked out. And so thank you again. Have a great day, and remember to stay healthy, art historians.